Good morning. So you probably recognize I'm not Pastor Tony, but hold that thought. Maybe I am. We're going to get that a little bit later. So this is my confirmation banner. Don't look at the date at the bottom. And I chose this. We were able to choose our own verses, and I chose this verse because it meant something to me. It spoke to me. Now, maybe I chose this verse because it was influenced by my confirmation instructors, but looking back several decades later, it was more, much more. So I want to kind of walk through that. I was really young when my father had the discussion with me about humility, very young. And the fact that my father had that discussion with me at a young age should tell you the type of man he is. In fact, he was such that type of man that I asked him to be the best man at my wedding. Why? Because I could think of no one better to fit that definition. So he said to me, "You know worse than anyone else, you know better than anyone else, but you alone decide if you're going to make a difference." I thought that was a really great definition of discipleship for a child at that age. As we walk through this, hopefully you're going to find that I've had a long road of discipleship. A lot of you here, have helped me along the way. Past congregations have helped me along the way. My parents have helped me along the way. My friends have helped me along the way. The interesting thing about discipleship is that it's not always the people you would define as disciples. A lot of those people will move you through discipleship, not really being literal, but being subtle. So let's walk through a little bit of that too. Let's set the record straight to begin. In Matthew 26, verse 19 to 20, Jesus says, "Therefore, go forth and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit." He was talking to us, each one of us directly. Mark Plass used to teach a Bible here, and Mark would say in the Bible study, the Bible's not an historical document, it's an owner's manual. And so right he was. If you look at all the doctrine in the Bible today, it's applicable to everything that's going on in society. It's a lesson for all of us to follow. Disciples need disciples. Back to my confirmation for a moment. I was confirmed by Pastor Kuhn. Pastor Kuhn was a retired chaplain, Air Force chaplain. And just to give you an idea of what Pastor Kuhn was like, I asked Pastor Volz one day, "Do you know Pastor Kuhn?" And Pastor Volz said, "Jerry, I know Jerry," like Pastor Volz would say. Chaplains are interesting, cut from a different cloth, but nonetheless, a cloth that shaped me. The pulpit in that church went up a few steps and actually went over top of the congregation, about to where the bell tower is. Pastor Kuhn would get up in that pulpit, and the second he would lean forward like this to give the sermon, all the kids in the congregation would rear back, right? Like they're in the front row of a movie theater during a horror film. He had that kind of image, but yet that kind of image sticks with me today. Disciples need disciples. He made such a big influence on my life. So let me give you an example. As part of our 2-year confirmation class, we had acolyte, which would be nothing new. The robes actually hung on a clothes hanger outside of Pastor Kuhn's office. So we would come out, we'd get robed up like this. He'd come out and give us a little look, straighten us up, which obviously to this day I haven't gotten right because Judy has to do that for me before every service. He'd kind of look at us, chuckle, and off we go. Second year was a different experience. Second year, he'd walk out, look at us. We would be looking like this. Remember, chaplain, Air Force. After the inspection was over, the military inspection was over, he would just look and say, "Let's go." He'd walk off, and we'd follow him into the church. So I had a few years later, I was able to ask him this question. Why is it first year you chuckled and kind of laughed and walked away? Second year, you said nothing and we just followed you. And his response back to me was, first year, you were anxious. Second year, you were responsible. Interesting thought about discipleship, right? Freeing people from being anxious, but also being very responsible and moving forward. So let's fast forward to college. My junior year in college, I was a resident assistant. Resident assistants are the people, if you've never been there, are the people that walk around, make sure nobody's getting crazy, breaking anything in the dorm, basically keeping order. Although I will tell you, having been an RA for 2 years, it is mayhem, total mayhem. And if that's not enough to think it's mayhem, I was an RA in a co-ed by suite dorm. Total mayhem. So as part of that training to be an RA, we had to go through an exercise. We had to be prepared for anything that could happen. So my particular training exercise led to a room. There was a door propped open, and I was told by the instructor, enter the room. I slowly pushed the door open. There sitting against the wall is a young lady, cross-legged on the floor, with a pair of closed scissors on her arm. Not if you understand what I'm saying. You understand the situation. Okay, I want to be very careful to be conscientious of people who have gone through this. So let's just keep that as part of the example. I walk in and I sit 4 feet away from her, because you have to keep a safe distance, you yourself. And I asked her, what's wrong? And she replied to me, it's my first year of college, I'm lonely, I feel separate, I just want the pain to stop. This is an exercise. We know from today's society, loneliness is a killer. The worst thing you can do to somebody, especially in a strange environment like college, their first year, is let people be lonely. So, I did my best to comfort her. I passed. So now we're 4 weeks later. I'm working in the dorm, my first weekend. And let me just put this in perspective for you. 3 floors, 82 rooms, co-ed by suite, and you're there by yourself taking care of this dorm the whole weekend. It's quite the experience. So I'm in my room, a call comes in. I pick the phone up, and there's a young lady on the other end, and she says, you need to get up to the 2nd floor now. So I go flying up the stairs, turn the corner to the 2nd floor, and there's a group of students outside this room, and the young lady that had called me, just kind of, like the Christmas Carol, just kind of points like this to the room. So I walk up to the door is cracked, slowly push the door open. There, sitting against the wall, cross-legged, holding a pair of open scissors, is a young lady. So again, I approach, walk into the room, sit 4 feet away from her, and I asked her, what's wrong? She says to me, I'm pregnant. Now, remember, we're disciples. So we could be sitting there saying, you ruined your life, you shouldn't make a mistake, you should have been more careful. I said, okay, well, there's a community of people here surrounding you that are more than happy to help walk you through this. And she says, well, my father is a Methodist minister. Yeah, not this either. So I ask you this question. What do you say? What do you say? You have 35 to 45 seconds to give a response. What do you say? This is rural Southwest Virginia, Methodist, okay? So I looked at her and I said, we believe in forgiveness. Which was a very interesting way of saying it, because it wasn't me, it wasn't them, it wasn't they, it was we. We believe in forgiveness. She was a Methodist, I was a Lutheran, we got it, we connected. She put the scissors down, and I totally broke protocol. I went over, I gave her a hug, she started crying, I started crying, and we sat there for what seemed like an eternity until she let go. Now, I want to give you a different angle of the story. Resident assistants in a dorm report to a resident director, somebody in graduate school. My resident director was Craig Stambaugh. Craig was a very devout Methodist. He would say a prayer at the beginning of every staff meeting we had. So I'm in the room dealing with the situation. When an RA does not call into an RD within a matter of minutes, the alarms go off. The RD knows something's wrong. So I'm sitting in the room looking at the doorway, because you need to keep the doorway free in perspective, because if you don't, you may get trapped in the room. And I see Craig come to the doorway. Craig comes to the doorway right about the time of my father's a Methodist minister. Now, Craig being a Methodist, I thought this would take him back a little bit. It didn't. So Craig is standing there, and as he's standing there, the psychiatric team shows up. There's a group of professionals that immediately when that situation is identified, they come. Then Craig heard, "We believe in forgiveness." He turned around and pushed them out of the room, would not let them come in. We had that type of connection. So we got done hugging. They came in the room. They helped her out. I never saw her again. I don't know what happened to her. But I will say this. 4 thoughts. First one. What's the likelihood that the situation would have escalated if there was a non-believer in there? What's the likelihood that this situation would have escalated if the resident director was a non-believer? What's the likelihood that the situation would have escalated if that psychiatric team had come in right away? And here's the one that always I think of. Where did the words, "We believe in forgiveness," come from? I'd like to think I was fast in the clutch. Love to think that. Remember, 35, 40 seconds to a minute. And this is what I'll say to you. I am certain that those words were given to me. Given to me. They were perfect, eloquent. I couldn't have said anything better. Disciples need disciples. So I have a confession to make. The 4 years I was in college, I didn't go to church. So for you great-grandparents, grandparents, parents, a small off-road experience does not make the journey. 4 years doesn't decide the rest of your life. So my senior year, so close, so close. I'm walking down the hallway to do a radio shift. I turn the corner. Sorry. Didn't get it done. Okay. I turn the corner and I hear behind me, "Warfel." I turn around, and there standing in the doorway is Ted McCoskey. Ted was my mentor all 4 years. Ted is a mountain man. Big beard, long hair, strong guy. Ted says, "Come into my office, I want to talk to you." So I walk in. Ted says, "Take a seat." He says, "We're a public radio station, and as part of our outreach, we go out every Sunday and record a church service. And we air that church service at 2 p.m. in the afternoon. Every year, I have to find a student that'll go out and record the church services. This year, that student is you." So I'm thinking to myself very quickly, there's 300 kids in this program, but it's me. Why me? Well, you are sitting there knowing that. I didn't know it then, but you know. So I go out and I record every congregation that's possible, every denomination you can think of. The last congregation I'm going to record, Ted tells me, "You're going to need an hour and a half to go to this congregation." So up the mountain I go. Rural Virginia. Up the mountain I go. Asphalt turns to stones. Stones turn to dirt road. Dirt road turns to the type of road where there's ruts, right, where the vehicles have gone. Come into the clearing, and there in front of me is the cliche white church you see in every country movie. White church, white steeple, bare steps leading up to it. So I go in, set up the equipment, and I always ask somebody to, usually the organist, to play a few notes so I can set the levels on the machine. Good? Set them. I'm set. And the service, the minister comes up and says, "Thank you for coming. Let's start with our first hymn." So almost like here, except not. This is Southwest Virginia. I'm looking down at the recorder, and the place erupts like a carnival. The organ's blaring, the people are on their feet, they're happy, they're clapping, standing, going crazy, is the way I would put it. But what I remember about that moment is there was so much energy in that room, so much energy. Now, of course, the Lutheran in the back of my head is saying, "Looks great, too much information, let's go, let's get out of here, too much going on." right? But I stayed with it. And so toward the end of the service, a gentleman comes running up, and I mean running up, puts his hands on my shoulders and says, "Can you feel it, brother? You have to feel it. You know you have to feel it." Never forget him. He was a little bit more emphatic than I am, but you get the point. You know, disciples need disciples. So I graduate. My parents would be going. And I decide to go to graduate school, so I'm back at home, living with my parents. And if you remember the opening statements I made about my father, I'm back in church. Right? Back in church. So as I get more involved in this church, somehow the minister of music hears that I can read music and play. Thanks, Mom. So he asks me to be in the bell choir. So I joined the bell choir. In the bell choir are several people my age. So we get to know each other. And we're asked to be part of this marketing committee that's looking at the future growth of the church. So I become part of the marketing committee. And as part of the marketing committee, I got more and more interaction with the pastor. That was Pastor Mordhorst. Pastor Mordhorst had been the pastor at the University of Richmond for 4 years. Remember? Mayhem. We had a connection. He knew it. I knew it. So we're sitting in the meeting, one of the meetings, and he says to me, "I want you to stay after." So I stay after. And he says, "We're starting a new program called Stephen's Ministry. We'd like you to think about joining us." I did. Now I want you to think about sophomore and junior year of college. Stephen's Ministry is Lutheran Crisis Counseling. Disciples need disciples. Pastor Kuhn, disciple. The people who trained me as RAs, as an RA, disciples. The young lady who had the crisis, disciple. Craig Stambaugh, disciple. Ted McCoskey, wouldn't want to be called a disciple, but he made a big influence. All those college town congregations, disciples. My energetic brother who ran up to me at the end of the service, disciple. The bell choir, disciples. Pastor Mordhorst, disciples. On and on and on. All of these people were disciples to me. All these people had an influence in my life. So I'm going to impart these words to you, the same words that my father gave me, sort of. As a disciple, everyday disciple, you have the opportunity to seize what's happening in the day. You have the opportunity to go out and help somebody, to recognize the situations that are going on. Trust me, they are there. They're right in front of you. You just have to change the lens a little bit. And when you see them and those opportunities come up, help those people, because disciples need disciples. And you know what? This happened in my professional career a lot, and that's a story for another day. But people are drawn to disciples. They know who you are. They feel what you have inside. They're drawn to you. And that's one of the quickest ways to get them to the gospel, because when they're drawn to you, that barrier's dropped down. There's a lot of situations that have happened in my life. It can happen to you too. I want to take a slightly different approach to this verse. Blessed are those who have not seen and yet believe. I would say, blessed are those who have not seen and yet help me to believe, because they have. They reinforce my faith exponentially. Oh, and for those of you who are looking at the program or drawing pictures, whichever one you're doing something, I want to go back to the beginning and say, I'm not Pastor Tony, but I am. And all of you are too. You're disciples, we're disciples. We all need to go out and spread the gospel. That's part of our mission. That's what Jesus has said to us. Christ is risen. He is risen indeed. Hallelujah. And my last comment is, even for pastors, they need disciples. Now, Tony and I went back and forth on this message a little bit. This isn't in the script, but I'm going to say it. Pastor Tony does not take compliments very well. So to the congregation, I'm going to tell you, make him as uncomfortable as you can every day. We love you, Tony. Disciples need disciples. God bless you all, my church, my disciples. Amen.